Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today. Welcome to Time for More Injury Funding, the podcast for all who want to learn about legal funding and its significance in personal injury, medical malpractice, workers' compensation, trucking law, workers' right share, and many other types of law practice domains. I'm your host, Laura, founder and CEO of More Injury Funding, the legal funding counselors with passion for law, medicine, legal funding, and heart for all suffering individuals. In today's episode, I have an honor to be talking to the attorney Guy DeAndrea, a dedicated advocate for abuse survivors. As a former prosecutor and civil trial lawyer with over 100 jury trials, he fights for victims' rights and holds institutions accountable, empowering survivors on their journey to justice. Attorney DeAndrea is a partner at Laffey, Bucci, DeAndrea, Reich and Ryan LLP based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Today, we'll be talking about artificial intelligence and what it takes to conquer doubts while embracing AI in the legal field. At the end of our episode, I prepared a fun pop-up question for our guests, so stay tuned. Without further ado, let me introduce you to Guy DeAndrea.
Well, thank you for having me, Laura. I really appreciate you taking the time to have me on here. I'm excited to discuss the topic that you had just addressed, artificial intelligence in the legal field, as we use it instrumentally and a tremendous amount in our law firm to provide the most efficient and best service for our clients without ever compromising, obviously, their data, their protection, and most importantly, in combination with that, is the quality of litigation we provide.
Wonderful. And as a nationally recognized thought leader on artificial intelligence in the legal profession, can you guys share how your firm incorporates AI into case management and legal research? What specific tools or platforms do you find most effective?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we utilize different platforms and programs as it relates to generative AI that I would hope a lot of firms at this point have leaned into, because if you're not doing it now, you're already way behind. And the more that this is developing, not on a weekly or monthly basis, it's developing on an hourly basis, and I'm not kidding. And so the different platforms that we utilize for different purposes include some sort of our favorites. The first of which is by far, from my testing and vetting of a lot of platforms, the best in the business, which is CoCounsel, which is a product offered by Thomson Reuters. And that does a whole host of things for litigators or for transactional attorneys. But I'll speak most specifically to the litigation side, because that's what I know and what I do for my clients. And so some of the features that can do for law firms and what it saves you is time and energy, and it allows you to move your case forward. So, you get a data dump, right? Couple hundred documents, maybe a couple thousand, or depending on what you're doing, maybe tens of thousands, right? You'd put them into the platform. It's secure. So if you're using a cloud-based management system already, you're familiar with this. They're on the AWS server, so it's legally compliant with our requirements for the protection of our clients' data. And it allows you to do a whole host of things. Some of them, you dump in 10,000 documents. You click a button called timeline. 7-8 minutes later, it will literally generate for you a full timeline of every event that is of any significance. How does it know that it's a significant event without you telling it anything? It's doing it contextually, right? So it's thinking like a human, so to speak, would in developing this timeline. And what used to take, and any lawyer who's ever built an actual copious timeline knows that can take, depending on the number of documents, days, weeks, maybe literally even months. You're getting one in 7 minutes. And the quality of it is unbelievable. So now you have this timeline before you even dig in, and you can see, what do I really need to hone in on? Because I haven't read these documents yet. I'm going to. But before I do, what do I need to hone in on? You could also run very detailed summaries, broad summaries, right? So you get a grand jury report in my line of work, and it's a couple hundred pages. Well, I may be going into a meeting, but I want to know what this says. I run it in the program. 60 seconds later, I could have either a broad one pager, what's this about? More detailed couple pages, and then a page by page, like bullet points, right? So I can know in 60 seconds, I have my summaries. And within 3 minutes, I have a pretty good appreciation before I really dig in on what this report or documents are about. And then, of course, you have the databases you can build which are uploading all of the documents in your case and then using generative AI to do prompts, right? Tell me all the ways in which this defendant violated the safety protocols or policies and procedures that relate, for instance, to the protection of children, right?
Mhm.
And it'll pull out all of the hot docs, and you don't have to guess whether it's right or wrong because it's linking to the actual document. So there's no hallucinations. There's none of that people are afraid of,
I
right?
love it.
Yeah, you know right away by it's linked to the document. So
Mhm.
that's the major platforms we're using. There's a couple others that I could go over if you want, or I don't, I know I've been talking for a while.
Not at all. I love it. It's fascinating. It's to me, it's mind blowing. Let's jump to our next question because we have quite a bit to cover today on AI. There are numerous AI programs available on the market today. In your experience, what criteria should firms consider to ensure that their chosen artificial intelligence tools meet the necessary safety and security standards for legal use?
Sure. So it depends on what you're doing. So when you're looking for a program, there's really not a one-stop shopping, meaning there's different programs that do different things. So when you're vetting programs, and you don't need all of them right away, try things out, but understand what you need it for. Okay. So the program I just described, when you're vetting something, you want to know, is it a closed or an open system? Meaning, is it searching the web? Is it searching outside of the parameters of the program? So, for instance, CoCounsel does not. A program I use called Depot Copilot by Filevine does not. It's a closed system, right? And so that means it's not putting your documents out there. It's not pulling from other sources. It's closed in the world in which it was built. So you want to know whether it's closed or open. You want to know what servers it's on, right? Make sure you know where your data is being housed so you know the security levels that are in place, right? So the Microsoft servers or the AWS servers, they're the ones, I'm sure there are others, but they're the ones that are generally speaking legally compliant with data protection. So that's critical, right? And then also know the program you're utilizing. So we use something like ChatGPT a lot. But what we don't use it for is legal research. We don't use it to draft any sort of memorandums that's going to a court, co-counsel, defense attorneys, clients, right? Instead, what that's used for is sort of content creation. In other words, if you want a draft, your paralegals to do a draft of written interrogatories without giving any of your client's data, so you can just speak generically about who your client is, it will generate a nice set of rocks. You have to do the editing, right? You have to go through, put what you want, but you can get a real nice sample set as a content, right? Content creation pretty quickly so that you can get these out the door the very same day, probably the same morning that you started them. And they're just as good, if not better, than if you had done them from scratch, right? And it's saving that much time. And so knowing what you're using it for and how you're using it will drive that. So, understand that. Do some research. ChatGPT is like content generation. Co-counsel, Depot Copilot, those type of things, hosted by, recognized legal leaders, Filevine, Westlaw, Thomson Reuters, right? Your data is protected as it can be, right? As protected as it can be. So that's the type of things that you need to look for and understand before you jump into this.
Wonderful. And thank you so much for mentioning, some of these programs that you use and you feel very comfortable with. I really appreciate it. Implementing artificial intelligence in law raises obviously several ethical questions. Can you discuss some of the key ethical considerations firms should keep in mind when adapting this transformative technology?
Yeah. So, using a program that's an open source and open AI, you should not be putting any confidential or secretive, not secretive, that's the wrong word, but, documents that could violate your client's rights or violate a protective order. So for instance, if you have medical records, right, you can't violate HIPAA. I'm not suggesting you can't use anything. What I'm suggesting is I'm not going to put, ask ChatGPT, which it can do it. It can do a summary of a client's medical records. I would never do that, right? They say it's protected, and it may very well be. But I want to make sure that I am complying with all of my ethical duties and responsibilities and making sure that I'm protecting my client's data. So by focusing on those platforms that are already legally compliant with what we need to do, right? And the best way to test that is I'm going to go out on a limb and say most firms at this point, the majority of firms are using a cloud-based management system. So my talking point to attorneys who do that, who are scared of potential data breaches, I'm like, listen, if you're using a cloud-based system like Fileline, Clio, something along those lines, you're already housing your client's data, right? So if there's an AI platform with a trusted legal, as a trusted legal resource that's on the same servers, you're not doing anything different. You're just asking it to do something different with the data that's already housed on those servers, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So that, that's what you need to be looking at. Are the platforms you're putting these sensitive documents on, are they the same sort of backbones as the legal cloud-based server maintenance you're already doing with those documents?
That totally makes sense. For legal leaders who are hesitant or unsure about the benefits of adopting AI, what advice would you offer? How can they overcome their concerns? I guess the nervousness and see the potential value of AI that can bring to their practice. Because, I don't know, in Georgia, I see a lot of attorneys and probably, actually, unfortunately, I would say very small fraction of attorneys, specifically in personal injury field, use AI or believe in it. And a lot of them just scared and they say, I will never use it.
They're going to be left behind very quickly. I mean, it's the equivalent of, I don't want to use digital legal research, right? I'm still going to do book research. That would be insane right now in today's world if you're still doing book research, right? You have to adopt and adapt. Actually, what I tell lawyers is one of the rules of professional responsibility in most states is that you must keep up with the legal trends.
Absolutely.
Because if other firms are providing a service to clients that you're not, you're behind. And you could potentially, in some arguments, be in violation of your own professional rules by not staying with this, right?
And hurting your clients too.
Absolutely. And so, when we are to this idea of I'm afraid to use it, and what is the real benefit? The benefit, I could go on for literally hours on this, but the biggest one I say to especially personal injury attorneys is time, right? We don't bill by the hour. So we can't get our time back. And so if I ask someone, does your paralegals or does your associates do depo summaries, for example, deposition summaries? Yeah. How long does that take for an associate or a paralegal to read, a 400-page transcript and then give you a really detailed summary? Some will say 6 hours, some say 8, some say I have it within 3 days. I said, well, what I will promise, because I've seen it time and time again, hundreds of times, right? Is it's not going to take you 8 hours. It's not going to take you 2 days. It's not going to take you 3 days. You'll have a summary that I promise you will be as good, if not better, than the summary you're already getting within 4.5 minutes.
That's beyond anything.
Save, right? You just bought, whoever's doing that work, you just bought back 7 hours and 56 minutes or 2 days or 3 days. So you're not firing that person. What can that person now do with that time that's been sort of bought back, right? They can do other things that move other cases along faster without, again, the big thing is without compromising that.
Absolutely. Looking ahead, how do you envision the role of AI evolving in the legal profession over the, let's say, next 5 to 10 years? What trends should firms be aware of?
Yeah, it already is transformative. And so what it's going to do is speed things up where you don't necessarily need a human being going line by line and doing things, right? So, if you're doing a jurisdictional analysis on a legal issue, well, now with AI, let's say precision through Westlaw, it's doing that for you in minutes, not days of research, right? Mm-hmm. Now, of course, you have to vet the data that it returns, but it's still a time save of 50 to 80% is what I'm finding in doing these things, right? And so what we're going to see in terms of the trends are, you're going to see AI being able to write full, detailed, better than a human being, written discovery, being able to draft complaints that's already in the works, like literally being able to draft you a complaint. So the attorney who's ultimately going to be filing that can edit, make sure it's correct, accurate, put all the data or details they need in, right? So that's going to be done. There's going to be analyses on, you upload 2 briefs and it's going to tell you what court are you in, this court, which judge, this judge. Here's the likelihood based on these briefs before they're even filed or your responsive brief is filed of you winning. And what is that based on? It's based on every decision that judge has ever reached, and it's going to contextually analyze your words that you chose to write in your responsive pleading against all the other times in which this judge faced a particular issue that was similar to yours, right? Mm-hmm. And so now to know, do I need to change my argument? Am I on the right page with this argument, right? And so when I say these things, people are like, well, that means we're taking away lawyers. No, what it means is I'm a litigator. So what it will allow me to do is focus on what I believe I do best, which is litigation. So depositions, trials, really focusing in on those skills. Why on the back end, which all of course has to again be vetted, gone through all of that. Still a huge time save. But I can focus on that litigation aspect, which will free up so much of that time to move these cases to either a mediation, to a trial, or some other dispositive portion for that client's case.
I just thought of something. It would be very interesting to have you on my next episode, you and a current law professor, and have a good discussion right there. Because I wonder how they teach nowadays the young generation of lawyers in schools, and what do they think about AI. But that's for another time. Okay. Can you share a specific success story, or maybe two, from your firm or another organization that effectively utilized AI in a legal context? What were the results?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you an example. We had a defendant dump on us about 5 or 7 days, maybe we'll call it 7, right? It was no more than 7, no less than 5, before a round of depositions. And I'm not exaggerating, 10 million pages, 10 million. Okay. And of course, my skeptical side, and I think I'm accurate in this, but the reason would be is that they know we would never be able to get through these documents. No human being could ever read 10 million pages, right, in 5 days and be anywhat nearly effective on going to a deposition. So that ideally we'd either cancel or postpone these depositions. Well, you upload those 10 million pages. I know the broad areas that I need to know about. So I upload them, that because it was such a copious document dump, that may have taken 2 to 3 hours to upload that many documents and have them batched and processed. Then I start what's called the prompting system, process, right? Tell me, identify all emails when they're discussing, and then whatever your issues are, right? Your issues. You don't know what's in the documents, but when you're going in, look at these documents manually, what are you looking for? Are you looking for notice? Are you looking for discussions on a particular word, a particular topic, right? So now you can contextually prompt this system to say, tell me all about communications regarding this. Tell me all the ways in which there was a breach of a duty. Tell me all, right? Boom, 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 prompting. Now, you prompt all these things, 7 to 8 minutes later, there's a full response based on those 10 million documents answering contextually each of those questions. So for example, tell me how this client, violated the safety procedures as it relates to X. And I'm not going to say X because it's a confidential case, but as it relates to X, first thing you get is the below documents that we've identified, and there was a lot because it's 10 million pages, address that topic, and here's why. So it gives you a couple of paragraphs or a couple of pages contextually with cites to those documents as to why it believes these documents answer that very direct prompt. And then below that, you have all of your documents that if you click on it, it goes to that direct page and it's highlighted relating to how this portion of the document addresses that, whatever that particular prompt was. What does that mean? Now it means I know where the gold is, right? Because when defense attorneys, and I have a lot of great friends who are defense attorneys, but when they give you documents, they're in no particular order. They're, and there's a reason for that, right? And so now I know where maybe some of these hot docs are, but I'm building hot docs, right off the jump. And so I'm prepared to go in and start these depositions. And what you'll see is that very quickly, when you start doing this and showing how prepared you are, which is like sometimes mind-blowing because these big defense firms are like, how is a 10-person firm this prepared with 10 million documents when we just dump them, right? All of a sudden, there's discussions on mediation or settlement.
I love it. Wow. That's just, like I said, mind-blowing, impressive. What steps, in your opinion, should firms take to ensure that their staff is adequately trained to use AI tools? How important is ongoing education in this rapidly changing landscape?
It's immensely important to have ongoing training. So, the vendors that you're working with, make sure that one of the things they have as a resource to you, if you're buying their product, is training, right? And so they'll come out, if it's a good vendor, or on Zoom as often as you need, give you those updates. Make sure that a platform you're using especially for large usage, has a really copious, support system as it relates to a chat feature or training videos, right? Or how-tos in combination with the in-person training. This is happening so fast and so rapidly that training needs to happen relatively frequently to make sure everyone is on the same page and using it effectively, efficiently, and ethically.
So let's say when you hire somebody for your own firm, is the requirement one of the requirements that the person has, is willing or has a knowledge of AI?
Yeah, so as soon as someone gets hired, we walk through our programs, we get them the training. Oftentimes, I do a lot of that training, but I like doing it, so I don't mind it.
Mhm.
And just getting sure they're acclimated to using it. And then once you get into it, you have to keep up with the changes, the improvements, and things along those lines. But once you really lean into it, it's pretty intuitive because you're using it like, imagine if you could just say, I wish someone could pick out all these hot dogs. You can almost talk, like a regular person, and it's going to respond like, despite it being a machine, right? And so it becomes pretty intuitive, and people really start to lean in. And the more you use anything, right, the more you start to have a mastery of that area. And so that's what I see when people really lean in and use this. They get better and better, of course, with training, but even just because they're using it so frequently.
Absolutely. And the next question may sound a little bit maybe philosophical, but how do you see the balance between artificial intelligence and human expertise evolving? Will there be a need for traditional legal skills in an AI-driven world? And that's a question that every attorney or every person in the legal field keeps on asking.
Yeah, I think there's going to be certain skill sets, certainly, that are not going to be needed anymore. And people are like, oh my God. And it's like, well, hang on. Think about everything we're not a unique industry. I mean, if we're unique in what we do, I suppose, but we're not unique in the sense of look at any other business, any other industry, right? The joke, it's not a joke necessarily, but it's like, before like the wheelbarrow was invented or cranes and things along those lines, people carried things on their back to build things, right? We don't do that anymore for the most part, right? We don't have people carrying concrete buckets up 50 flights of stairs. Why? Because we have cranes, right? So did that take away jobs? Well, not necessarily. People had to adapt rather, right? So people had to get more specialized skill sets, right? We need to keep crane operators. We need people who know how to do a different skill set. So I don't like to think about it as eliminating jobs. I think about it as entering a new era of our profession, and people will have to adapt and utilize skill sets that they possess as a lawyer in a different way to work with the efficiencies that are built into AI.
I love your analogies. What practical steps can smaller firms take to start integrating AI into their practices, especially if they have limited resources?
Sure. So you can start out. I mean, there are, like, for instance, you want to start learning and seeing what it can actually do, meaning AI. Don't put any sensitive data necessarily into it, but start playing around with programs like ChatGPT, seeing what it can actually do and learning what it can do, right? Don't just put a prompt to be like, oh, that's a junk answer. Well, look at your prompt. Was your prompt appropriate? What were you really asking for? Don't overthink it sometimes, right? But there are free versions of something like that. So people can start seeing the benefits, right? And then when they see the benefits, maybe you can free up some resources because you're not spending so much resources in one area to then go into some of the more copious or more detailed programs that do come with a price tag. And sometimes it's not cheap, right?
Mhm,
But
mhm.
the investment is into yourself, not into the company that's providing you the AI, meaning you're going to be able to take on more cases, which ideally will generate you more revenue, which then, it's like sort of like this flywheel, right? You invest money, that saves time, which allows you to take on more cases, which allows you to bring in more revenue, which allows you to invest more into the software, right? And now you have this perpetual flywheel that is building your business, and you're able to build on cases and bring in more cases that you weren't able to before because you have resources that couldn't accommodate them, right? And
Mhm.
so that is where people should be thinking when they're trying to build their business.
Mhm. And at the end of the day, we do all of this for the sake of our clients. How
100%.
has the integration of AI into your law firm's practice affected your relationship with clients? Are there any notable changes in how you communicate or deliver services?
Yeah, critical ways that we can communicate, especially when working with a sexual assault survivor, is, when I'm doing an interview, we're going through some really horrific time for them. And this, I think, applies to any time you're discussing with a client. If you utilize AI features with your client's consent and permission, to me, that's critical. Um, I can now be focused on the client. I don't need to take a single note. I don't need to take a single note. I don't need to write a single thing down, right? Because as soon as the meeting's over, within 3 seconds, I have a full transcript of what we just discussed. I have a summary. I have action items, next steps. Now, what can you do with that? Well, you have it internally for your team. But more importantly, if the client, we all have seen this, is like, hey, I know we just spoke for an hour and a half on the process of civil litigation, but can we go over that again? Absolutely, we can. But before we do that, here's a summary of what we just talked about that outlines in details exactly those steps. And it's a nice resource for you to have also, but then let us know when you're free to jump on and we'll go over it again. 9 times out of 10, and this is not a way to get out of talking with clients, but it is a way to stop repetitive conversations, right? Because time is very valuable for all sides. It now allows the client like, no, I don't need another meeting, right? Like that this is amazing. Thank you for setting this. Because anytime I have a question about the written discovery process, I can go back to this and review it, and they'll have it within seconds or minutes of the meeting. And so the client, working with the clients in that capacity has been sort of game changing. The level of service you can provide.
Wow, it's so impressive. With the use of AI tools, what measures should law firms take to protect client data? We touched a little bit on that, but how can they ensure compliance with privacy regulations?
Yeah. So again, anytime you're putting any private doc or any documents that are of a sensitive nature on a platform, right? To me, the standard is what servers are they using and where are they in the space of the legal field, right? So I'm not putting my sensitive documents on a platform that's used by anyone and everyone. I'm just not. I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying I don't do that, right? I put my documents, I trust in organizations and companies that utilize the secure platforms that any one of our case management platforms are using. So AWS, the Microsoft servers, for instance, if I'm using data on Westlaw servers, I trust in that as much as you can trust in any server, right? Or any platform. Right. But I know that they're legally compliant. You can look at their regulations, online. I trust in Filevine. That's just the platform we use for case management. And so other programs like that. But I'm very selective on where I house these documents.
Mm-hmm. What metrics or indicators do you use to evaluate the success of AI implementation in your firm? How do you assess the impacts on efficiency and outcomes?
Sure. So you can do analyses and reports on, prior to using AI, I'll just use this as an example, how many sets of interrogatories were we sending out on a given week? Post AI, how many are we sending out? And then you compare them quality-wise, quality checks and controls, and you're also reviewing them before they go out. But, are they the same or better, right? That's this, right? So how much are we doing? So I'm seeing, what used to be, 1-2 sets of interrogatories or written discovery going out. Now we can have, with the use of AI, I don't want to say an endless amount, but as many as you can handle, literally. I mean, you can do multiple sets a day with one person, right? And so you see the benefits on that. When we're doing legal research, right? It's no longer, putting in connectors and keywords and then reading 10 cases to hopefully find one that gets you on the right track or trail. It's now just asking the natural question in Pennsylvania, for example, right? And then whatever your legal questions. Westlaw, through what's called AI Precision, will give you a full memorandum, a legal brief, like a law clerk would do on the issue. And it will cite all the cases. So now you can really dig into those specific cases that are on point that may give you other cases. Maybe you reprompt it. But now legal research, what used to take days, weeks, depending on the complexity of the issue, you can have done in minutes.
If listeners could take away one key message about the role of AI in the legal profession, what would you want that to be?
Sure. AI is not going away. And in fact, it has already been transformative in our space. And if you are not leaned in, I don't want to say it's not too late, but the longer you wait, it will become too late. You will be outmatched. You will be way, way, way behind to a point that you may not be able to recover. And I know that might sound doomsday, but it's the truth. I mean, you're bringing a knife to a gunfight. Like if you're not using AI, you're not bringing a knife to a gunfight. You're coming in with a paper airplane, right? I mean, and it's so you have to lean into this. Have to.
This was so great. I hope our discussion about artificial intelligence and what it takes to conquer doubts while embracing AI in the legal field was informative and educational. And as promised, here's a fun pop question for a Guy. You ready?
Okay.
All
Sure.
right. Can you share a story about a time when something didn't go as planned, but you learned an invaluable lesson from it?
Something did not go as planned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So using technology, sometimes, I'm a paperless person in terms of my practice. And so it had always worked for me perfectly. And I didn't have, there's hardware that can connect versus sort of like airplaying or using it over the Wi-Fi. And so I went into a deposition with no documents to do, to hand, rather. I had it all on my iPad. There wasn't, shockingly, Wi-Fi in the room, and the connection didn't work, and I didn't have the necessary wires to connect it, right? So I'm like, I need to show you documents. So that was we were going to take a lunch break. Let's take a breakfast break so I can run over to a FedEx, right? Print out all of these documents. It's like sweating because I'm running around. So that's only happened once to me, and I now carry every conceivable cord, wire, fail safe that you could ever imagine. But that was a learning lesson. Make sure your place has Wi-Fi.
I love it. You sound like such a prepared person, and I'm sure AI helps tremendously.
Yeah.
Again, that was attorney Guy DeAndrea, partner of Laffey, Bucci, DeAndrea, Reich, and Ryan LLP, based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I want to thank you all for listening and watching our story today. For more tips and tricks on legal funding and personal injury law and medicine related topics, follow me, download, like, and subscribe for It's Time for More Injury Funding podcast on several podcast platforms worldwide, and follow More Injury Funding on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Pinterest, YouTube, Google Business Profile, and my website at moreinjuryfunding.com. I can't wait to see you, my dear listeners and viewers, at my next upcoming episode. Tune in soon for our next guest. Until then, be well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.